Before Cabrini-Green was labeled public housing's most notorious failure, it was Little Hell, Chicago's first slum. It birthed Chicago's Irish and Italian mafia and was home to every vice imaginable. The slums were knocked down in 1942 and replaced by the 586-unit Cabrini row houses. For the local black folk, when the war ended, so did their jobs. Mass unemployment followed. Drug dealer became the #1 occupation of Cabrini's adult males, and the decadence and criminality surged. Demand for housing in the area resulted in the construction of several high-rise projects between 1957 and 1962. Cabrini-Green. Decades later, it was an urban nightmare, the worst of its kind. Here's how the story played out. By the 1960s, the notoriously corrupt Chicago Housing Authority had stopped screening and background checks on prospective residents. It was first come, first served. Many prominent street gangs would move in and make Cabrini-Green home, and it wasn't long before local gangsters took advantage of the vantage points the new towers offered. The Cabrini-Green housing projects were known for their high crime rates, and the sniper shootings of the late 20th century only added to their infamy. Imagine living in constant fear, not knowing when or where the next attack might come from. It was a place riddled with paranoia and uncertainty. Speaking of paranoia and uncertainty, it's unsettling how easy it is to find personal information about anyone online today. That's why I'm excited to introduce you to our sponsor for this video, Incogni. Incogni is a personal information removal service designed to help you take back control of your privacy. With Incogni, you don't have to worry about your personal data being exposed on countless websites. They handle all the heavy lifting for you, contacting data brokers and requesting the removal of your information. It's incredibly simple to get started. Just sign up, provide the necessary details, and let Incogni do the rest. What I love about Incogni is how thorough and efficient they are. They constantly monitor and follow up with data brokers to ensure your information stays off the web. Plus, their user-friendly dashboard lets you track the progress in real time. In a world where privacy is becoming increasingly rare, Incogni offers peace of mind. So, if you value your privacy as much as I do, use my code TrueCrimeAndLore at the link incogni.com/truecrimeandlore to get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Now, back to the story of Cabrini-Green. On April 5th, 1968, one day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, the west side of Chicago erupted in chaos. Though the day started with peaceful marches, by nighttime, neighborhoods were being destroyed and burned to the ground. There were shootouts with police and mass looting too. Over at Cabrini, at around 3 a.m., snipers were positioned in the high-rise buildings and directed their shots at firemen, prompting a police response. Police officers and National Guardsmen stormed the building the shots were coming from and made their way to the 12th floor. They never found the shooters, but they did find a dead body on the balcony. Curtis Jeffro, 31, of that address. He was dead from a headshot. In the aftermath, local businesses packed up and left, and the neighborhood became even poorer. Even worse, the threat of sniper fire gave cops a new fear of Cabrini-Green. The residents would now be on their own for the next few decades. In 1970, 38-year-old Sergeant James Severin was a 13-year veteran of the Chicago PD and had previously worked the security detail protecting Martin Luther King Jr. in 1966. 6 weeks before his death, Sergeant Severin stood near Cabrini-Green and told a reporter about his hopes for a walk-and-talk patrol, an attempt to pacify relationships between local cops and Cabrini-Green residents. Uncle Jim, as he was known to the local kids, played softball with kids, taught them hand tricks, and set up an ice cream fund for them with his own money. 1970 was a tense time in Chicago. In December '69, Chicago police assassinated two leaders of the Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, on the West Side. Combined with the assassination of MLK and recurring police brutality, that period saw a general lack of respect for authority across America. Cabrini itself had bred a class of angry black youths who waged urban guerrilla warfare against cops whenever they got the chance. Chicago cops called it Combat Alley because gunshots would go off inside and from the building almost daily. residents were known to throw Molotovs, bricks, and bottles from the building too. Given the danger and the hate they received, emergency calls from the projects routinely went unanswered by police, but not from Sergeant Severin and Rosado. As the court-accepted version of events played out, on July 17, 1970, multiple witnesses and a security guard testified seeing George Knights and Johnny Veal in the vicinity of and inside the building that shots would later be fired from. Veal allegedly asked a security guard if some of the apartments on the 6th floor were vacant. He also allegedly asked some youths around for 30-30 ammunition. Witnesses later saw Veal and Knights with the 30-30 Winchester and the 30-30 Savage rifles. They heard them audibly planning to ice the police too. Knights and Veal then made their way to a 6th floor apartment with their rifles, where they stood on a bathtub to get a better view of the baseball diamond below. A witness saw the barrel of a gun sticking out of a window, and loud shots followed. Witnesses would give accounts of their braggadocious attitude and statements after the shooting. It was an hour before the end of Sergeant Severin's shift when he went to check out the gunfire from the towers. Sergeant Rosado joined him. There was an ongoing cross-building shootout between the Black Disciples and the Deuces, and both cops walked across the concrete baseball diamond as they approached one of the buildings. They say the blast sounded like a shotgun. Sergeant Severin clutched at his chest where there was a baseball-sized hole. He then dropped lifeless. Sergeant Rosado, 10 feet behind him, turned to help, or maybe tried to run for cover, but he didn't get far. The second shot struck him and spun him around. He took a few more steps and then fell. Both officers had been killed with a single shot before they could get their guns out. When backup arrived to recover the fallen officers' bodies, they had to crouch behind cars while rifle fire bounced off the concrete around them. In the ensuing standoff, cops fired hundreds of rounds into the building. When the police got inside the building, now 200 strong, they kicked down doors and searched each apartment 3 or 4 times. Over 100 people were arrested, and the 2 rifles used in the murders were found in an incinerator in the building. George Knights was caught in the sweep. Johnny Veal turned himself in several days later after seeing his wanted status on TV. The people captured were surprisingly cooperative, but the investigations were later marred with accusations of police brutality at the station. The police allegedly demanded a story from each person under threat of violence or prison. At least one person confessed and implicated 3 others. 2 of the accused were Veal and Knights. Veal and Knights would later be sentenced to indefinite terms of 100 to 199 years at the Illinois State Penitentiary. But the trial was marred by a ton of inconsistencies. During the trial, Veal reported that Chicago police officers threatened members of his family, warning them not to show up for court proceedings. They told Veal that if he was acquitted, they'd kill him. Veal's attorney's office was broken into during the trial and files on the case were stolen. His attorney also told Veal he feared police retaliation. No one testified that they actually saw either Veal or Knight shooting at the police or anyone else. Evidence from the coroner withheld from the jury showed the shots were in fact fired from street level, but the autopsy reports he made were never introduced as evidence. Witness testimonies weren't the most credible, as many were members of rival gangs. There were no fingerprints on the rifles found in the building that day. What was clear was that someone had gunned the 2 officers down from a distance, and Chicago PD had to see someone take the fall for it. Whether they arrested the right people to begin with still remains a mystery to this day. Johnny Veal, who was 17 at the time, was paroled in 2021. George Knights remains in prison. In 1972, manufacturing companies laid off several thousand African Americans. At Cabrini, poverty and desperation went up, and single moms moved in undocumented people to help with the rent. Before long, many people couldn't afford to pay rent, and the city gave up on renovations entirely. People slept in the hallways, stairwells, used drugs openly, pissed in the open, and spray painted the walls with graffiti. The kids played amongst trash and drug needles. Sniper shootings continued unabated, and multiple innocents would be felled every single month. During raids, cops would find weapons stashed in hallway fireboxes, many equipped with telescopic sights. On top of that, Cabrini elevators were by far the most dangerous form of transport in the city. Cabrini youths had learned how to control the elevators to set up muggings, rapes, and extortion. The gang problem got even worse throughout the 70s when the Egyptian Cobras, Black Disciples, and Vice Lords absorbed all the smaller gangs. Over the years, they grow Cabrini into a 9-figure-a-year drug empire, a gangster's paradise where armed dealers worked in gang-mandated shifts. From the outside, the towers became even more intimidating. After several people were either thrown off or fell off the breezeways, chain-link fences were installed, and they made the towers look like animal cages. Cabrini became shrouded in urban legends of the horrors that happened there. Only junkies would ever dare come close. In 1981, Mayor Jane Byrne moved into a 16th-floor apartment at Cabrini for 3 weeks. She did it to prove to the city that if you had constant police presence in the area, the crime and gangs would go away.
Cabrini residents have mixed emotions about having the mayor as a neighbor.
She could get sniped too. She not no different. She just a different color.
The violence stopped only while she was there. When she left, the gangs learned the well doors shut to fortify apartments just like the mayor had. By the 90s, 70% of cabrini-green residents were 16 or younger. One of the project's 134-unit towers had just 5 adult male residents. Law enforcement stayed as far from the projects as possible as they blocked the streets at night near the buildings. The gang members now had the gall to walk outside with automatic weapons and even fire them in the air. 942 Chicagoans were murdered in 1992, making it the most deadly year in the city since 1957. Anthony Kwabene Garrett was an expert marksman who served 3 years in the military in the early 1970s. The 6-foot tattooed 33-year-old umpired Cabrini Youth League baseball games. He was also a security chief for the Stones. Garrett's criminal record spanned 18 years. He was convicted 6 times between 1976 and 1987 on weapons charges. In 1981, he was acquitted of killing a rival gang member in a Cabrini stairwell, and in 92, he was free on bond for a 1991 weapons charge. In the days prior, gunfire had flared between the vice lords who controlled one building and Stones at another. According to court documents on October 13, 1992, witnesses claimed that Garrett had expressed that he was upset with the vice lords and voiced his intention to retaliate. He went to a 10th-floor apartment where the Cobra stashed an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. Garrett then went to an open window in the bathroom that offered a direct view of the enemy's building. From there, he saw 6 vice lords. From a standing offhand position, he aimed and fired 2 to 3 shots at them. He then left the apartment and handed the rifle to a youngster on the way out. Jenner Elementary at Cabrini-Green had already lost 2 young students to gunfire in 1992. In fact, shots went off so often, the local kids had learned to drop to the ground at the sound of gunfire. A little before 9 a.m. on Tuesday, October 13, 1992, children were out playing, and others were on their way to school when Annette Freeman and her 7-year-old son, Dontrell Davis, grabbed each other's hands and started walking the 100 feet from their apartment building to Jenner Elementary. When the shot rang out, Dontrell dropped to the ground, and his mother assumed he had ducked. He was down from a shot to the left side of the face. He was pronounced dead on arrival at Children's Memorial Hospital. Detectives soon found a witness who had seen shots fired from the window of a 10th-floor apartment about 300 yards from where Dontrell was gunned down. The building was more than half vacant, but used frequently by gang members who posted sentries on the upper floors. In apartment 1001, police found 3 .233 caliber shell casings, apparently from a high-powered rifle. A witness would confess to seeing Kwabene carrying a rifle up the stairs of the building earlier that morning, and the police knew exactly who Kwabene was. Garrett was arrested 5 hours after the shooting and held in an interrogation room for 24 hours of intermittent questioning. Garrett signed a 5.5-page confession the next day, or so the cops would claim. Garrett would later claim he was beaten with a rubber hose and forced to sign. In court, prosecutors portrayed Garrett as an incorrigible individual, and in 1994, Garrett was convicted of murdering Dontrell and sentenced to 100 years in prison. The gun used to kill Dontrell was never found. Dontrell's murder made everyone feel embarrassed. It symbolized everything that was wrong with Chicago that year. In the aftermath, It kicked off a renewed war on drugs and gangs, and one city official suggested calling in the National Guard, a step that wasn't taken. Mayor Richard Daley instead ordered a police sweep of Cabrini buildings for weapons and drugs. Underused buildings were sealed. Metal detectors and stringent security systems were installed in the high-rises, and leaders of 12 street gangs declared a truce. That truce lasted for at least 3 to 4 years. Crime dropped citywide the next year, and there were no homicides at Cabrini for 8 months after Dontrell's slaying. Regardless, the murder made local and national politicians shift their efforts from reform of Cabrini to its destruction. Not just Cabrini, but the other projects in Chicago and across America. Between September 27, 1995 and May 3, 2011, Cabrini-Green was erased from the planet. What was once Little Hell and Cabrini-Green now looks unrecognizable today. The area is filled with high-priced condos and townhomes. And that's the story of the worst ghetto America has ever seen. 23 towers of the most prototypical inner-city black poverty.